The hills of western Missouri hide more than just deer paths and forgotten creeks. They conceal stories that never made it into history books, stories that were deliberately erased. In 1851, local authorities documented the existence of a family of 7 living in isolation 10 miles outside of Jefferson City. Within 8 months of their discovery, 5 family members had vanished completely. The remaining 2 never spoke again, at least not in any language anyone could understand. County records from that year mention unusual disturbances requiring intervention from both medical and legal authorities. These documents remained sealed in the state archives for over a century, their yellowed pages marked with a simple notation, "Concluded. No further action required." What that bland, bureaucratic phrase concealed was something far more troubling: the systematic destruction of an entire family, whose only crime was speaking words no one else could hear. Dr. Emmett Calloway, who witnessed the family's final days, left behind a leather journal discovered in 1967 during renovations to his former residence. The journal contains observations so disturbing that 3 separate academic institutions declined to publish its contents. "I have witnessed something that challenges the very foundation of what we believe about human communication," he wrote, "and I fear what men of science will do with this knowledge." Are you prepared to learn what happens when society faces something it cannot or will not understand? The story of the Blackwood family isn't about superstition or supernatural phenomena. It's about something far more dangerous: the lengths to which rational men will go when confronted with the inexplicable. In the autumn of 1851, Jefferson City was expanding rapidly, its population swelling with those seeking opportunity in Missouri's fertile lands. But 20 minutes' ride from the bustle of commerce and politics, dense woodlands still harbored places untouched by progress. It was here, in a clearing nestled between Henson Creek and the rolling foothills, that the Blackwood family had lived for nearly 15 years. Their homestead was modest but well-maintained, a sturdy 2-story house with a stone foundation, flanked by a barn and smokehouse. To passing hunters, it appeared unremarkable. What happened inside its walls was anything but. The family, Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood and their 5 children, had always kept to themselves. Thomas would occasionally bring furs and handcrafted items to sell in town, but he conducted these transactions with minimal conversation. Eleanor was never seen in Jefferson City. Local shopkeepers described Thomas as peculiar but harmless, noting his reluctance to engage in small talk and his habit of completing transactions as quickly as possible before returning to his wagon. Few thought much of this behavior. Frontier life often attracted those who preferred solitude. What set the Blackwoods apart, however, was discovered only when Reverend James Miller, a newly arrived Presbyterian minister, made it his mission to visit all families within riding distance of his church. His encounter with the Blackwoods on September 17, 1851, would later be described in his correspondence as a moment when I questioned whether my faith was strong enough to comprehend what God has wrought in this world. The Reverend arrived at midday, finding all 7 family members, Thomas, Eleanor, and their children, Mary, 16, Samuel, 14, Elizabeth, 12, Joseph, 9, and infant Catherine, gathered around their dining table. What disturbed him was not their appearance or manner, but what happened when they spoke to each other. In his words, "They conversed in sounds I cannot describe as any earthly language, not the chattering of foreigners nor the dialects of natives, but something that seemed to change the very quality of the air when spoken." More troubling still was how the youngest children, even the infant, responded with perfect comprehension. Miller's presence silenced the family immediately. When addressed, Thomas responded in halting but comprehensible English, explaining that they needed no spiritual guidance and preferred to be left alone. The Reverend, deeply unsettled, departed, but could not shake what he had witnessed. 3 days later, he returned with Dr. Calloway, ostensibly to offer medical attention to the family, but truly to confirm what he had heard. It was the hunter, Marcus Finch, who first noticed something was wrong. Tracking deer at dawn near the Blackwood property, he heard what he later described as singing that wasn't singing, more like the wind was forming words. Through morning mist, he observed Eleanor Blackwood standing in her garden, her mouth moving while her hands worked methodically among the plants. What made Finch freeze was not the strange sounds, but what happened next. Birds, circling above, began to descend in patterns that matched her vocalization's rhythm. When she stopped, so did their movement. Finch watched, transfixed as Eleanor looked directly at him through the trees. She said nothing, but he felt a pressure in his ears, like being underwater. Later, he would tell Dr. Calloway, "That feeling stayed with me for days. I'd wake up hearing it, not with my ears, but somewhere deeper. Always the same sounds, like she'd put her voice inside my head." When Finch reported this to Sheriff Daniels, he was dismissed as having had too much whiskey. But the encounter haunted him. He began watching the Blackwood property from a distance, documenting comings and goings in a small notebook. He observed the children playing in patterns that seemed ritualistic, calling to each other in their strange language while moving in circular formations. He noted how wildlife behaved unusually around their property. Deer approaching without fear, birds gathering in unprecedented numbers. After 3 weeks of observation, Finch noticed something that finally convinced him to return to the sheriff. The oldest daughter, Mary, stood at the property's edge one evening, speaking to the darkness in their strange tongue. What emerged from the woods in response made the hardened hunter abandon his post and run all the way back to town. Sheriff Daniels never recorded what Finch claimed to have seen, only that the man was in a state of extreme agitation and that, despite his previous reliability, his current testimony cannot be considered credible. Nevertheless, the sheriff finally agreed to visit the Blackwood property the following day. What he found was a family engaged in normal activities, speaking broken but understandable English in his presence. Thomas explained their limited language skills as the result of isolation and self-education. The sheriff noted nothing unusual except the children's peculiar stillness when addressed and their tendency to look to their mother before responding to any question. He would have left satisfied had he not decided to make one final inspection of the barn. There, scratched into the wooden support beams, were symbols unlike any writing he had encountered. Curves and angles that seemed to shift under direct observation. When questioned, Thomas claimed they were merely children's drawings. The sheriff departed, but something about those markings disturbed him enough to mention them to Reverend Miller, who in turn consulted Dr. Calloway. What none of them realized was that their interest had triggered something within the Blackwood family. Something that would lead to consequences none could have anticipated. Within days of the sheriff's visit, residents of Jefferson City began reporting unusual occurrences. Martha Williams, who taught at the small schoolhouse on the edge of town, noticed her students speaking nonsensical phrases to each other during breaks. When questioned, the children claimed they were only repeating what they'd heard in their sleep. Benjamin Cole, the town blacksmith, reported waking to find his tools rearranged in patterns resembling the symbols later discovered in the Blackwood barn. Most disturbing were the accounts from multiple households of children sleepwalking toward the western woods, only to be discovered by their parents at the threshold of their homes, eyes open but unseeing. Dr. Calloway, intrigued by these reports and encouraged by Reverend Miller's concerns, decided to visit the Blackwood homestead himself. His journal entry from October 3rd reads, "I approached under the pretense of a routine health inspection. Eleanor Blackwood greeted me at the door with civility, but unmistakable reluctance. The children were nowhere to be seen, though I distinctly heard movement from the upper floor. Thomas appeared shortly after, his manner cordial but guarded. The doctor convinced Thomas to allow him to examine the children, claiming concerns about a fever spreading among the youth of Jefferson City. One by one, the Blackwood children were presented. Dr. Calloway noted their robust physical health but was disturbed by their behavior. They submit to examination without protest, yet their eyes remain fixed on their mother throughout. When I attempt direct questions, they respond only after Eleanor makes a subtle sound, barely perceptible, but it appears to grant permission. The youngest boy, Joseph, broke this pattern momentarily when Calloway showed him a small pocket watch. The child's face lit with curiosity, and he reached for the timepiece, asking something in their strange language. Before Calloway could respond, Eleanor spoke sharply, causing Joseph to withdraw his hand as if burned. What happened next would haunt Calloway for years. The boy's expression transformed from childlike wonder to blank submission in an instant. More disturbing still, I observed a small trickle of blood from his left nostril immediately following his mother's utterance. Eleanor quickly ushered the doctor out, explaining that the children tired easily. As he departed, Calloway noted Thomas watching from an upstairs window, his expression not of suspicion, but of profound sorrow. Upon returning to town, Calloway discovered his pocket watch was missing. Assuming it had been taken by one of the Blackwood children, he planned to return the following day. That night, however, the watch appeared on his bedside table, though all doors and windows to his home remained locked. Next to it lay a small piece of paper bearing a single symbol, matching those found in the Blackwood barn. The next morning, October 5th, 13-year-old Sarah Jenkins was found wandering in the town square at dawn, unresponsive to all questions. When finally coaxed to speak, she uttered phrases that her parents claimed sounded just like those Blackwood folks. More troubling was her insistence that she had been called to the woods by a voice inside her head. By midday, 4 more children exhibited similar behavior, each falling into catatonic states after attempting to leave town in the direction of the Blackwood property. Sheriff Daniels, now genuinely alarmed, assembled a group of 8 men to investigate. They arrived at the Blackwood homestead to find it apparently abandoned, no smoke from the chimney, no activity in the yard. After repeated knocking yielded no response, they forced entry into the main house. Inside, they discovered a scene that defied explanation. Furniture arranged in precise geometric patterns, walls covered in the same cryptic symbols found in the barn, and on the dining table, 5 places set with empty plates. The family Bible lay open in the center, its margins filled with the strange symbols, some drawn over the printed text. Upstairs, the men found the bedrooms immaculate, beds made as if never slept in. Only in the smallest room, belonging to infant Catherine, did they find signs of disturbance. The cradle overturned and deep scratches in the wooden floor beneath it. Most unsettling was what they discovered in the root cellar, a circle of candles surrounding a small wooden box. Inside lay Dr. Calloway's pocket watch, stopped at 3:33, alongside a child's drawing depicting 7 figures standing beneath what appeared to be a night sky, filled with the now familiar symbols. As the search party prepared to leave, Deputy William Hayes noticed something protruding from the soil in the family garden. Digging revealed a leather-bound journal belonging to Eleanor Blackwood. Unlike the incomprehensible symbols found throughout the house, this journal was written in clear, educated English. Its contents would later cause Dr. Calloway to question everything he understood about human language and development. Eleanor wrote of coming from a long line of women who carried the old speech in their blood. She described how this language, which she called the first tongue, was not learned but remembered, emerging naturally in children born to her lineage around their 5th year. Her own awakening to this inherited language had occurred at age 12, driving her family to move frequently to avoid detection. The journal detailed her marriage to Thomas, who, though unable to speak the language himself, had accepted his wife's gift and helped protect their growing family from outside scrutiny. Most disturbing were Eleanor's observations of how the language affected those who heard it. It resonates with something dormant in all human minds. Children are most susceptible, their barriers not yet calcified by conventional speech. Animals respond as if to familiar calls. Even plants seem to bend toward certain phrases, as if the sounds realign something fundamental in all living things. The final entries revealed Eleanor's growing fear that someone in Jefferson City had recognized the nature of their language. She wrote, "They will come with their science and religion, seeking to study or silence us. They cannot comprehend that this tongue predates their institutions, their nations, their gods. It is the speech that shaped thought before thought had form. If they discover what the children can do, what Mary has already done, they will destroy us, or worse, use us." The last page contained a single line: "If you are reading this, we have gone where you cannot follow." While the men were still processing this discovery, a messenger arrived from town with alarming news. All 5 children who had exhibited strange behavior were now missing from their homes, along with 7 other children from neighboring farms. A search was immediately organized, with parties scouring the woods surrounding the Blackwood property. As dusk approached, lanterns could be seen moving through the trees as the desperate search continued. It was young Deputy Hayes who first heard it, a sound like singing coming from a small cave entrance, half hidden by fallen logs nearly a mile from the Blackwood home. Approaching cautiously, the search party discerned multiple voices, both adult and childlike, engaged in what seemed like a rhythmic chant. The sounds grew louder as they neared the entrance, creating what Hayes later described as a physical pressure against our ears and eyes, as if the air itself had thickened. Sheriff Daniels called out, demanding that whoever was inside reveal themselves. The chanting stopped abruptly. In the silence that followed, a single voice responded, not from the cave, but from directly behind the search party. They turned to find Mary Blackwood, the eldest daughter, standing alone in the gathering darkness. "You shouldn't have come," Mary said, her English perfect and unaccented, unlike the broken speech her father had used with visitors. Mother warned them this would happen. Before anyone could respond, Mary made a sound, not a word, but something between a whistle and a hum. The effect was immediate. 3 men in the search party dropped to their knees, hands clasped over their ears. Sheriff Daniels reached for his pistol but found his arm refusing to obey his command. Only Dr. Calloway seemed unaffected, watching in scientific fascination even as fear coursed through him. "The others are curious about you," Mary continued, her expression eerily calm. "Especially the children from town. They hear us so clearly now." She turned to Dr. Calloway. "You wanted to understand. Come see." Something in her invitation terrified the men more than any threat could have. Hayes later testified that he felt an overwhelming urge to flee upon hearing her words. 4 men did exactly that, stumbling back toward town in panic. The remaining 5, including Calloway and Daniels, found themselves following Mary toward the cave entrance, their bodies moving independent of their wills. Inside, illuminated by strange phosphorescent fungi growing along the walls, they discovered the missing children seated in a perfect circle. In the center stood Eleanor Blackwood, her hands moving in patterns that matched the rhythms of her speech. The other Blackwood children were positioned at cardinal points around the circle. Thomas Blackwood was nowhere to be seen. The town children's eyes were open but unseeing, their mouths moving in imperfect mimicry of the sounds Eleanor produced. What horrified the search party was not just this scene, but what happened when Eleanor turned to acknowledge their presence. The children continued speaking in unison, even in her silence, the sounds becoming more confident with each passing moment. "They're remembering," Mary explained to Calloway. "All humans once spoke as we do. Your modern languages are like chains, binding thought to limited forms. Our words shape more than meaning. They shape reality." As if to demonstrate, Mary spoke a short phrase toward a small pool of water in the corner of the cave. The liquid responded by rising into a perfect sphere, hovering momentarily before collapsing back with a splash. "This is why we've hidden for generations," she continued. The last time our kind lived openly, they burned my grandmother's entire village in Prussia. Sheriff Daniels, partially breaking free from whatever influence held him, demanded to know what they had done to the children. Eleanor finally spoke, her English as flawless as her daughter's. "We've done nothing but speak near them. Their minds recognized what their ancestors knew. The young always remember most easily." Dr. Calloway, scientific curiosity momentarily overcoming his fear, asked, "What is this language? Where did it come from?" Eleanor's answer was cryptic. "It didn't come from anywhere, Doctor. It was here before humans gave names to things, before writing confined thought to marks on paper. It is the language that taught birds to migrate, trees to turn toward light, hearts to beat in rhythm." The sheriff, regaining more of his faculties, declared he was taking everyone back to town immediately. Eleanor smiled sadly at this. "No one is being held here against their will. Ask the children if they wish to return." When questioned, each child from town responded with the same phrase in the strange tongue. Mary translated, "They say they can finally hear the world properly." They don't want the silence again. Whatever might have happened next was interrupted by the arrival of the remaining search party members, now accompanied by more townsmen carrying torches and weapons. Seeing the scene in the cave, they reacted with predictable horror and superstition. Someone shouted about witchcraft. Another fired a warning shot that echoed deafeningly in the confined space. In the chaos that followed, Eleanor spoke a single, sharp word. Mary immediately began ushering the town children toward a narrow passage at the back of the cave. Two of the younger Blackwood children followed, but Samuel, the 14-year-old son, hesitated, looking back at his mother with an expression of anguish. "Go," Eleanor commanded in English. "Find your father at the meeting place. Remember what we practiced." As the children disappeared into the darkness, Eleanor turned to face the angry mob. What happened next is documented only in Dr. Calloway's private journal, as official reports claim simply that the suspect attempted to flee and fell to her death in the ensuing pursuit. Calloway's account differs significantly. Mrs. Blackwood made no attempt to escape. Instead, she began to speak in that extraordinary tongue, her voice gaining power with each syllable. The effect on the armed men was immediate, confusion, then pain evident on their faces. 3 collapsed unconscious. Others fired wildly, their shots striking the cave walls. I observed her continue speaking even after being struck by at least 1 bullet, her words somehow growing more potent rather than weaker. The very air seemed to vibrate with meaning. Then, most incredibly, the cave itself appeared to respond to her voice. A section of the ceiling collapsed, creating a barrier between Eleanor and the mob. Her final words, directed at me specifically, were in perfect English. "Some knowledge isn't meant for your kind yet, Doctor." We tried to live quietly. The search for the missing children and remaining Blackwoods continued for weeks. The narrow passage at the back of the cave led to a complex network of underground tunnels that seemed to extend for miles beneath the Missouri hills. Search parties ventured as far as they dared, but found no trace of Mary or the others. The town children who had been in the cave were never seen again. 2 months after the incident, Thomas Blackwood was discovered living in a small cabin 50 miles south with infant Catherine and Joseph, the 9-year-old. Both children appeared healthy, but neither would speak in any language. When questioned, Thomas claimed his wife and other children had gone somewhere words can't follow. He insisted that Joseph and Catherine had forgotten the old speech after the trauma of separation from their mother. Medical examination found nothing physically wrong with the children. Joseph would occasionally make drawings of the strange symbols, but showed no comprehension when asked about their meaning. Catherine, still too young for speech, developed normally in all ways except one. She never cried audibly, though tears would sometimes stream down her face in complete silence. Thomas and the 2 children were eventually relocated to a farm outside St. Louis, where state authorities could monitor their development. Joseph grew into adulthood without ever speaking again, though he became an accomplished artist whose abstract paintings gained modest recognition in later years. Catherine eventually developed speech, but only in conventional English, with no trace of the first tongue her family had once shared. Dr. Calloway dedicated the remainder of his career to studying the Blackwood case, traveling as far as Prussia to research Eleanor's family history. His findings were never published formally, but his private papers contain transcriptions of the symbols found in the Blackwood home, alongside attempts to reproduce phonetically what he had heard in the cave. Most telling is his final journal entry, dated April 14, 1872, shortly before his death. "I have spent 20 years trying to understand what I witnessed that night. Science offers no explanation for a language that can manipulate matter, influence minds, be inherited rather than learned. Yet I heard it. I saw its effects. Most troubling is my growing conviction that Eleanor was right. This was not some isolated phenomenon, but something fundamental to human existence that we have forgotten or suppressed. I sometimes wonder if the Blackwood children are still out there, speaking their ancient tongue, waiting for the world to remember how to listen." The cave where Eleanor Blackwood made her last stand collapsed entirely in the spring of 1853. Whether from natural causes or deliberate demolition, records do not specify. The Blackwood homestead was burned to the ground by unknown parties that same year. County documents regarding the case were sealed by judicial order and remained so until 1947, when they were transferred to the State Historical Archives under the classification Resolved Natural Causes. Yet stories persisted in the region for generations. Hunters reported hearing strange singing in the deepest parts of the forest. Children occasionally developed speaking fits, where they produced sounds no one recognized. Most were treated for hysteria or epilepsy. Some families simply disappeared overnight, leaving their possessions behind. Perhaps most telling is what happened to the town of Jefferson City itself in the decades that followed. While it grew and prospered as Missouri's capital, linguistic studies conducted in 1890 noted that the regional dialect contained several phonetic anomalies found nowhere else in America. Sounds that, according to the researchers' notes, seem to originate not from the throat or mouth, but from somewhere deeper in the human instrument, as if the body itself remembers a way of speaking that the mind has forgotten. When we silence what we don't understand, we may be silencing the oldest truths humanity has ever known. Truths encoded not in our books or institutions, but in the very architecture of our existence. The Blackwood family wasn't speaking a foreign language. They were speaking the language we all once knew, before we taught ourselves to stop listening.